Media is one of the most subjective things on the planet, and everyone has their own opinion on certain movies and shows. But don't you just hate it when you have that one movie that captures your interest that no one else seems to care about? Well, you lot are in for a treat. This is the films that I love that everyone else hates. Just to note, most of the movies that I'm going to be talking about are not perfect, and some of them have even been getting panned or just blatantly hated and such, or getting a low rating on certain websites. Some of you may disagree with me on these things, but there might be something here that you actually agree with, so stay tuned until the end of this video, and without further ado, let's dive into the countdown. Number 10. Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 3 is renowned for being one of the worst of the Spider-Man movies. I never really understood the hate for it at the time, but when my mate told me that Sam Brady got forced to put Venom in it, then I understood the hate for it. It's because Sam Brady never got the creative freedom that he wanted. He only wanted to put Sandman in. Sam Brady's rage over the movie is an understatement and beyond understandable. But I've watched the movie since I was 3 years old, and I've always loved Venom and Sandman, mostly Sandman. But when I look at Venom, I can't really hate him, as he does do a wide variety of stuff throughout the film, such as turning Peter Parker into the black-suited Spider-Man and giving him his ego, teaming up with Sandman, putting Mary Jane in the spiderweb and killing off Harry. Some of these scenes wouldn't have really made much sense without him, at least in my opinion. Not to mention the iconic dance that Peter Parker does, which I have absolute nostalgia for. Needless to say, I love the movie the way it is. I was originally going to put this film at second place on this list, but one of my mates pointed out that the movie is more loved than hated these days, and yeah, he's right. Number 9. Helen back. Now, first things first, Helen back is not a downright perfect movie. It just isn't. So before I get into the positives, I want to talk about the negatives. If done right, sex jokes can look and sound absolutely hysterical, but if they get used too many times, then it becomes very stale. Most of the humour from this movie was passable by long shot, but on the other hand, there were others that managed to get a laugh out of me. I liked how the way that the guys harass each other over a mint. I found that to be quite relatable and funny. And there was also a part where Satan puts the guy on a torture chair, but it turned out to be a Sibian. I also loved the scene where Satan does his dramatic entrance, where all his demons are calling him out, calling him a big fat knob and all that. I found that pretty hilarious, and he got really pissed over it. Number 8. Child's Play 3. Regarded as one of the weakest Chucky movies of all time, I actually thought this one was more creative, satisfying and endearing than the other two. Out of all the horror movies and the Chucky movies, I thought Chucky's death in this movie was one of the most inspiring and creative, satisfying pieces of footage I've ever seen. And the music as well. I thought the soundtrack for this film fitted the tone and visuals of what was going on. And yet, this film is not perfect, and some of the jokes in the movie fall flat. But they were more passable and weren't too painful for my eyes to bleed. Number 7. The 2015 Attack on Titan movie. I hear a lot of people saying that this movie is very inconsistent towards the manga and the show, and they're not wrong. The manga and the show are set in 18th century Germany, while the movies are set in the future of Japan. Although I don't understand why they had to change it from the past to the future, I can understand why they had to change it from Germany to Japan. It's because Japan doesn't seem to have that many minority groups. Anyway, aside from the inconsistencies and the race swapping aspects, the movie bombed at the box office and only got a 5.0 out of 10 on IMDb. Though nothing spectacular, but I think the visuals and the animation look okay. I know a lot of people say that the visuals look shit and all that, and I can see why. But when it comes to the look of the Colossal Titan, I just can't help it. It just looks so badass and nightmarish looking, the way Titans should be. Ironically, most of the Titans in this movie weren't CGI. They were all models, animatronics, and I like how the way they're using something original instead of using CGI. And I also like the soundtrack as well for the two movies, especially the ending of Part 2. Part 2's ending where they all choir chanting and all that. I found that really endearing to listen to. Number 6, The Happy Time Murders. I like this movie based on nostalgia that I had with it, but it was a complete mess at the box office, and it is renowned by so many critics for being unoriginal and just bland. Now, don't get me wrong, I have noticed a few flaws throughout the film, and the film itself is obviously not perfect, but needless to say, I'd watch this over Sausage Party and Pikachu any day. To me personally, the two main characters, Connie and Phillips, were actually really likeable characters. They do have their backstories and tainted with flaws and humour, and the bond between the two reminds me a lot of Charlie and Pim from Smile and Friends. Most directors would often put music into their media, and Happy Time Murders had one of the most catchiest pieces of music I've ever heard, and most of them made me become a fan of all of them, especially Greg Street Good Day. Number 5, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I just don't get the disappointment for this film. I thought it was really, really well executed. Not only is it well executed in terms of plots and story and all that, but it's also an absolutely satisfying and beautiful movie. Especially when we get moments of the seahorse crashing through the chocolate. I also think the cast do a much better job than the 1971 versions, and Willy Wonka was probably the most well-written character out of all of them, with a backstory and a motivation and flaws. And the humour was gold. Number 4, the Astro Boy movie. I don't care what people say about this movie, but I thought it was really inspirational. It got me interested in technology and character development. Even science fiction for that matter. And the soundtrack was just a pleasure to listen to. Even the characters were endearing. Toby wasn't a minge bag, he was just a charming character, and his father was a really relatable character. Number 3, Troll. I watched this movie twice, and I think the hate behind this movie is just so incredibly overwhelming. I often hear people say that, this movie makes me feel embarrassed for being a Norwegian, or it's just a shameless King Kong ripoff. Like, I just don't understand what people hate about it at all. I will admit, Troll is nowhere near as good as the legendary Troll Hunter, but I wouldn't say it's a downright awful movie. Speaking about the King Kong comments, Troll and King Kong have nothing in common with each other. They are two completely different monsters, have two completely different backgrounds, two completely different stories, and two completely different endings. So that's why I feel calling it a ripoff seems pointless. All in all, I had a blast of a time with this movie. And if you're a fan of Troll Hunter, then you might like this one as well. To be fair, I think the people who hate on this movie are just trolling. Do you get the joke? Number 2, Monsters vs. Aliens. A film that won millions at the box office but ended up receiving mixed reviews, mostly negative. In fact, this was the very first movie that I ever saw on cinemas, and the first one that ever caught my interest, head on. And it is the reason why I'm so obsessed with horror and monster movies. The giant robot was my favourite thing throughout the entire film. Mostly the robot, but the other characters were also endearing, like Galaxar and Susan. Despite having a toxic relationship, Susan is still a likeable and relatable character. Yet this movie is criminally underrated, and I don't get why. It has an insightful story, relatable characters, and its humour was dead tasteful. And finally, the number 1 movie that I love that everyone else hates is Jack the Giant Slayer. I have a lot to say about this film, and ironically, this is my number 1 movie of all time. Yes, a film that everyone else hates is my favourite movie of all goddamn time. In 2012, I became a massive fan of Jack and the Beanstalk, and I was watching it constantly on YouTube, and that's when I found the first trailer for this movie, and I was hyped to see it. And I remembered loving it that much to a point where I ended up going to the cinemas 3 times to see it. In fact, this was the only movie that managed to make me go to cinemas 3 times, more than once. Helen even encouraged me to become a filmmaker and write my own movies, because it was that inspirational. The 2 main protagonists, Jack and Isabel, were really relatable characters. I mean, I could relate to them in many ways. And I think the giants look really well designed and very intimidating looking, like they are proper scary, mean ass looking bastards. And I was hooked at nearly every scene in the film. And the soundtrack to this film was absolutely phenomenal. It was like close to Star Wars level of endurance. Ironically, the soundtrack was performed by John Ottman, the same guy who also did the soundtrack to Astro Boy. Now, although Jack the Giant Slayer is my favourite film of all time, I would not dream of calling it a near-perfect 10 out of 10 movie. It does have flaws, and the biggest issue that I have with the film would be its humour. The humour mainly comes from the giants. Now, don't get me wrong, they are serious around 90% of the time, but they do have their fair share of humour and jokes. Some of the jokes do work to this day and still give me a laugh and all that, but I was 7 years old when this movie was released, and back in the day I used to laugh at things like snot picking and fart jokes. The snot picking doesn't really bother me as much as the fart jokes do, and fart jokes are a trend that has not aged well in this day and age. But with the humour aside, I'd still rate this movie. It's epic, it's fun, it's inspirational, it's endearing, and it's just absolutely satisfying. And if you haven't seen the film already, I do recommend it. And considering that it's my favourite movie of all time, I'm going to give it a 9.9 out of 10. That is it for this video, and hopefully there has been a film here that you happen to like as well as much as I do. And hopefully you find the films in this countdown to be very interesting. If you do find them interesting and haven't seen them before, let me know in the comments section. And yeah, that is it. That's all I have for this video. I am Star Invader, and I'll see you all in the next video.